Welcome to this first video lecture on Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is summer reading. For those of you that have never had the opportunity to study a video file like this for homework, I'm going to give you definitions, I'm going to explain some basic concepts, and I'm going to assign you some responsibilities that go along with watching these videos. I would suggest a notebook for taking notes in English class so that you have not only your notes, but you have your screen and you can kind of work between both areas. It's important that you spend a good amount of time trying to find meaning in a dystopian world. If we look at Bradbury's novel, we get a lot of context for some larger social criticisms that the author is trying to make. This also gives us the opportunity to connect Fahrenheit 451 to a lesson before dying. So this is what I'm asking you to do in your first essay. This is what I'm asking you to do in your summer reading test. So my three major points are to talk about the concept of a dystopian world. Dystopia is D-Y-S-T-O-P-I-A. Dystopia. It's like a dysfunctional relationship. It's loosely defined, and I'll get to it a little bit later. A dystopia is a world that is meant to be perfect but cannot be. Every utopian society that shows up in books and movies, this kind of thing, ultimately fails because of the people that are involved in the process. This gives you a chance to look at Faber, to look at Granger, to look at Guy Montag himself, Lieutenant Beatty. I think he was lieutenant, I forgot. But Beatty, and then ultimately to look at Clarice and the role that these characters play in the overall process. I think it's then important for us to define satire. So this is our second major definition. The third idea is that we're going to talk about the concept of social criticism and how social criticism works in novels to develop larger points. So as you see me looking down, I have my own notes, and I'm using this to kind of direct us in the process. This is Monday night homework, so you need to sit and watch this video. Now granted, school hasn't officially started yet, that's tomorrow, but we do have the opportunity to get way ahead by doing our homework. So here we go back to the presentation itself. There's a lot going on in this novel. So for example, if you write down in your notes the idea that this novel is really about what happens when you deny knowledge to the general population. You deny knowledge. You deny education to the masses. You have a few people who have all the information and all the power. Very much like George Orwell's Animal Farm. Pardon me, which I knew that you all have read at some point in your process. So what then is the social effect of denying knowledge to a general population? So this is an opportunity for you to look at the characters of Guy Montag, Beatty, Mildred. I think I said Clarice earlier. She's the girl on the street. Mildred is Guy Montag's wife. Look at those examples and think about what Ray Bradbury is trying to do here with these characters and the general thoughts that he's trying to develop. So if we move through the notes themselves, got a lot of material here. So first of all, you need a definition of the major literary element in the novel. This is satire. Became especially popular during the Enlightenment, which means it's British literature. So you're a year away from that specific sort of idea, but look at the definition, in which it was believed that an artist could correct folly, bad behavior, what's wrong with society by using art as a mirror. So if I made a movie about what's wrong with society, my audience would then watch it and have a greater understanding. We're talking about books. Books that are written to change human behavior. Now, you need to write down the red definition for what satire is and be able to reproduce that definition when asked to do so. Summer reading test, on an essay, those kinds of things. Now, we break satire down into two specific categories. One is Horatian, based on the work of Horace, a Latin scholar. Generally, that kind of literature is more sympathetic and good-humored. We laugh, we have joy, we understand what's going on. The other kind is Juvenalian, which, if you look at the definition there, is significantly more bitter and biting than that of Horatian satire. Now, look at what I'm asking you to do. What type of satire does Bradbury use in his novel? You have to pick, and then when you pick, you have to have examples of why that choice is true. Notice, I'm not going to tell you right now what that is. Your job is to pick one and then come up with those particular examples. If you can do that, I think you're going to be in good shape. And the better examples you have, the better you're always going to do in my class. So if you can say, when Guy Montag was running through the streets and he was on video camera, and kind of talk about what happens there, or when Mildred overdoses, or when whatever else happens, when the woman chooses to burn to death rather than sacrifice her books, and then kind of talk about why that might be, you're going to have a good understanding of these two sets of terms. The other thing that we look at here is social satire. Authors that write the social satire, specifically to criticize general foibles or general mistakes of a society rather than to attack the individual. It's not Guy Montag that we're criticizing, or it's not Grant Wiggins. It's the society that creates such a circumstance. Notice what I did there. I also tied this to A Lesson Before Dying. Now, that's written in like 2002. Fahrenheit 451 is much more of a 1950s novel after communism has really kind of taken over and what's happened as a result. The second bullet point, it criticizes social conformity and equality. Now, look at the word conformity. In your file, in this file, you should be able to click on conformity and it takes you to a hyperlink where you look at the work of Mann and Kellman. I'm asking you on this first night to do a little bit of note-taking to see if you can understand how I'm going to use this. I even tell you how you do it. So if on the summer reading test I ask you about Mann and Kellman and kind of what they say, you should have the ability to really address those concepts. So I've been talking about social satire and how it works, why it matters, and you have been looking at your novel, Fahrenheit 451, and examining different examples of what Ray Bradbury is trying to satirize. So to give you a couple of examples from the earlier chapters of the book, take a look at the Montag house and how it's described. Look at Mildred and how she functions as a character. We know near the end of the novel that she sells out Guy Montag. She says, look, he's got books in this vent. She tries to get him sort of taken care of by the hound, by the characters in the book, so that her life is simpler and she doesn't have to worry about losing anything. Ironic what happens to her in the course of the story. Look at the other major players. You've got Beatty, or Beatty, however you want to say it, who admits openly to Montag that he too read the books, that he was very much aware of the kinds of material that's in the Odyssey and other works of Homer. He talks about reading Huck Finn and these types of what we would consider to be sort of critical literature, literature that is socially sort of outside of what's comfortable in society. Beatty admits to reading that. We also have Granger and the fact that he's that guy that memorizes books so that the knowledge is not lost. Faber is the guy that's kind of in the middle. He wants to preserve the knowledge, but he's so selfish and so driven by his own desire that he's kind of a guy that we dislike tremendously by the end of the novel. I remember a couple years ago I watched the movie The Book of Eli. in regards to this book. And very simply, the Book of Eli is exactly the story of Fahrenheit 451. You've got the post-apocalyptic world, very popular for modern Hollywood, to give us the desolate, there's no technology, people are fighting with swords because guns don't exist, those kinds of things. It's just like this future world where wars have destroyed society, and to sort of move on from there, we get a utopia where all the world is perfect. In this final segment of your initial lecture on Fahrenheit 451, I think these definitions are extraordinarily important. We're talking about a genre of literature that is very specific in its approach. So if you look at utopian literature, by definition, you break the Greek words down here. Utopia comes from a Greek pun. In Greek, the language means good plus place, and it also means no place. And they sound very similar. So in American literature, in British literature, we become very familiar with the definition, and it's right there after the word thus. So I would suggest you write that down in your notes and be able to defend that as a thesis statement for your paper, for your summer reading test. Now, utopian literature is a term for any writing that presents the reader with an impossible situation in a perfect society. So even though the world is stellar, even though everybody is equal, nobody really is. And these kinds of perfect societies have a really difficult time existing. Now, I find that definition interesting because it talks about a perfect society in a physical world, trying to take what we normally as a culture, Western culture, British lit, American lit, the respective societies, this religious belief that the perfect society exists when we die. So utopian literature takes that perfect world where everyone shares equally and tries to make it exist in the physical world, but it cannot by definition. So I think that's an interesting concept. Perfect idea for the thesis statement for a paper. So if you then take a look, and I think this might be my last slide. No, here we go. Taking it a little bit further, dystopian literature, from the Greek dystopos, or bad place. It's an imaginary society that represents a very unpleasant imaginary world in which ominous tendencies of our physical, present, social, political, and technological order are projected in some disastrous future culmination. This is Terminator and the Terminator franchise. There was an absolutely horrid movie that came out in the 90s called Demolition Man with Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes, based on a book called Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Same kind of a general concept here. We know that a dystopia presents readers with a world where all citizens are universally unhappy, manipulated, and repressed by a sinister, sadistic, totalitarian state. Look at when these books were written. In response to communism, in response to several fascist and communist and socialist ideas that were sort of sweeping the universe. So think about all these notes and the effect that they're going to have on your understanding of Fahrenheit 451. Now, if you didn't finish this lecture on Monday night, you have the reprieve of going back over it Tuesday night in preparation for your summer reading test. You can absolutely review this and use the content in here to sort of support your essay. For honors, this essay is going to be due the first week. For regular sophomores, it's going to come a bit later in the process. So you have a huge opportunity here to sort of walk yourself through this process. Now, the first lecture is going to be a bit long, but I intended it for a couple of days. So make sure you review it, you take some notes. In class, we're going to talk about A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest Gaines. So you'll have an opportunity to kind of connect these concepts and not get overburdened with work. So pace yourself, Make sure that you're doing everything you need to do and prepare for class.